Bret Baier and Chris Wallace were on that Cleveland stage as part of what turned out to be the biggest event in cable TV history.
Is there anyone on stage, and can I see hands, who is unwilling tonight to pledge your support to the eventual nominee of the Republican Party and pledge to not run an independent campaign against that person? Mr. Trump.
Why not use this first Republican presidential debate to share your proof with the American people?
So, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't even be talking about illegal immigration, Chris. You wouldn't even be talking about it.
I spoke earlier to the anchors of Special Report and Fox News Sunday. Bret Baier, Chris Wallace, welcome.
Thank you.
You made news in the first minute of that debate with the question about would anybody rule out a third-party bid, clearly aimed at Donald Trump, who did not like the question, said it was unfair. Why was he being targeted? Why was he being targeted?
Well, to be honest, it was a question that hovered around this debate for a couple of weeks. All of this talk about a possible independent run if he doesn't get the nod, if he doesn't get the nomination. And frankly, you didn't know who was going to raise their hand or not raise their hand. And I thought that I was really more prepared to have no one raise their hand and say, Mr. Trump, just to be clear, you have raised the prospect in recent weeks of an independent run. Are you saying you're making this pledge? But he did raise his hand, and that's where we got to that moment.
Right. I have a hard time understanding the criticism that you're asking somebody seeking the Republican nomination if he would support the nominee of that party. It's not like some out-of-bounds query.
Yeah, and he had been asked it numerous times before. So I thought we talked about different ways to do it, and we kind of came up collectively with that.
Yeah, and I think, and that was one of the things I can't emphasize enough as to what degree that this was a team effort. And every question that each of us asked,
every single one,
we all went over, and that was because we all knew it was the first question, it was a big question, it was going to be controversial. Yeah, and one of the things was, raise your hand if you're going to be supporting the nominee of the party. And of course, then everybody would have raised their hand. And at some point, and it was with like a house built by a committee, I don't know who came up with it, the idea was, raise your hand if you won't pledge to support, which created, I have to say, it kind of took my breath away. A really dramatic moment where you just saw that one hand go up on this, 10 candidates, one hand, and he gave that kind of sheepish look. And
it was a moment. Now, you pressed him on his companies and some units that went bankrupt, and he pushed back hard on that. But look, you said before the debate, it wasn't necessarily Fox's intention, but this had become the Trump show. And Trump has dominated the coverage of this campaign. So did Fox, in effect, put him front and center, not just physically, but in terms of the questioning, because it would made it such a cultural and entertaining event?
I don't think that was the reason. I mean, look, first of all, he's the front runner.
That's right.
He's got like
ding,
20.
Ding, ding, ding.
He's got 20 whatever percent. He's more than double digits ahead of Bush and Walker. So I mean, we haven't made him front and center. The American people have made him front and center.
And when he hits back on Twitter, as he's wont to do, and says unprofessional, unfair, inappropriate, your response?
We're doing our job. And look, I've been called, look, he plays by different rules than most politicians, but politicians like to squawk. We take shots or ask questions at them. They're allowed to shoot back at us. It's a big get.
I watched some of these prep sessions, and it was hours and hours and hours of honing and trying to get the correct phrasing and to cut off the escape routes that candidates might want to avail themselves of. I mean, you did it with Scott Walker, you did it with Jeb Bush, you did it with all of them. At the same time, was there a danger, do you think, about appearing as moderators to be too adversarial, too prosecutorial?
I mean, we wanted to make sure the questions were fair. We thought that each one of these in the dismount, as we called it, was a fair question. It was pointed, and especially at the beginning of the show, that was electability. This goes to their specific vulnerabilities and why or how they could get the nomination despite that. And we thought that was a good way to start that debate. Each one of them had their own specific issues that we went after, and everybody was treated the same. I mean, the whole thought that we were targeting one person, we were, dealing with 10 people.
You know, I have to tell you, Howie, I mean, it's funny as he talked about the dismount. There were, I can't tell you how intense this was. I was on vacation the first 2 weeks of July, and I was on vacation sitting there on my iPad writing questions. I mean, this has just been such a gnawing thing for the last couple of months, and a tremendous sense of responsibility. But we talked about the various topics. We called them buckets. We talked about how do you get to the end of the question, the dismount. At one point, I said, because our tendency was, all right, you said this, but that, and, we didn't want 2 hours of that. So at one point I said, we need something like a sorbet in the middle of a meal, a palate cleanser.
That became the phrase.
And that became a phrase.
Yeah.
And the idea was, like we hadn't mentioned Hillary Clinton much. Let's give a couple of candidates an opportunity to talk about Hillary Clinton. So between buckets, dismounts, and sorbets, it was a very interesting debate prep.
We had some raspberries, some lemons,
It was you two are master chefs along with Megyn Kelly. In a moment, Bret Baier and Chris Wallace react to conservative criticism of the debate. And later, Jon Stewart interrupts his final week at The Daily Show to go after me again. Is he really that thin-skinned?